again. Today we're going to go through how to prune fruit trees properly. These trees have all been structure pruned fairly well, and we may not need to do a whole lot of structure pruning, but thinning and tipping these beauties.
So I'm Linda Griffith, and this is an orchard that's about 15 years old. I'm a master gardener in San Luis Obispo County, and we're going to be pruning fruit trees today.
How long have you been working with master gardeners?
I've been a master gardener since 2014.
Great. Well, I'm so happy to get to work with you today.
Oh, my pleasure to have you come.
I asked you earlier about how these trees produced this year. Can you just kind of give a summary on how well they did, the apples, the plums, and the persimmons?
Well, we're right at the Fuyu persimmon, and it produced like wildfire. The first year, it's a youngish tree, so it was its first year of just doing great. I have buckets and buckets and buckets of Fuyu persimmons.
Great.
The other guys had a lot of fruit. The apples up here had a lot of apples on them, and I was picking quite steadily. The Anna and the Dorset Golden, they were just covered in fruit. I was giving it away like crazy.
Okay, so here we go. We're going to start out with a chainsaw and do a little structure pruning, get the bigger stuff, crossing branches, and yeah, anything that's too crowded in there. And we'll see how this goes. So there's a couple things you need to know about pruning apple trees. Some of the basics are, first of all, we want to bring the height down so it's easy to pick. Second of all, probably the most important thing is that apples produce fruit on old wood, not on new wood. So apples produce actually on old wood and on these little spurs here. So I find a lot of my clients cut these little spurs off, and they don't realize that those old spurs are where the apples are formed. So for example, right here you can see this node and new growth coming off of that node. So that's 1 year's growth out here. That will not produce fruit. But this older wood back here, which is 2 to 3 years old, maybe there's another node here, and these young spurs right here and this one back here, those are going to produce fruit on this older wood back in here. So once again, these sprouts that are new from last year are not going to produce anything, and we're going to cut out the crossing branches like these ones here that are just crossing into other healthy branches. And then you can see there's a lot of new growth in there. We're going to trim out. So the next tool I'll be using for thinning and pruning out crossing branches is a handsaw, and then we'll bring the top down with a pole printer. Now we're going to use a hand pruner to tip a lot of these long branches back as well and thinning them out. So when we selectively prune branches out, we're trying to choose branches that are crossing or too congested. So like this one here, too much growing up through the middle there. We've got a lot of lateral branches going on in one location, so we can thin some of those out. Gotta make good cuts. Always make your cuts at the branch bark collar. Yeah, tell us about this apple tree.
This is an Anna's apple. It produces in July and August. It's packed with beautiful green apples, light green apples. It grows really well with this other apple over here, which is a Dorset Golden. I think they even pollinate each other.
Oh, great.
And this is a low chill apple. I mean, it's a really heavy producer around here. Just gives me tons and tons of a real light flavored green apple. And by July, you're happy to have a nice apple. You know,
Yeah.
It's been a while since you've had a good apple.
Branch bark collar. Okay, now we're switching over to the pole printer. So now we're going to start working on the top of the tree. height that's more manageable. And thinning as we go. Just give it a nice flat top so we get lots of light penetration. So here's our finished apple tree. It's looking pretty good. We left a lot of these beautiful fruit spurs on the tree, you can see here, and they will produce lots of apples next year. So looking good. And just as a reminder, apple trees produce on 2-year-old wood and old fruit spurs. 2-year-old wood and old fruit spurs. So yeah, this tree is unpruned, and we're talking about the need to keep trees shorter for private orchards as opposed to commercial orchards.
Right.
Can you talk about that, Linda?
I sure can. So if you'll notice, so this is a tree at the end of the season, and I can reach up maybe 8 feet tall, so it's maybe 12 feet tall. That means that there's going to be fruit at the very, very, very top of this tree if I didn't do anything for next year. And that's way taller. It's taller than I want it to be because I don't want to have to be on a ladder picking fruit. And it's also more fruit than I need. As a single homeowner, I don't need 500 pieces of every kind of fruit. I need maybe 100 pieces of every kind of fruit. And so keeping the trees down at a smaller height limits the amount of fruit and limits the climbing that I need to do. Compare that over here, now down to about 8 feet tall, and is reachable, and it's going to produce less fruit. That's fine. I don't need that much fruit. And then I will even do thinning. I'll do some fruit thinning when they set fruit so that I have less fruit and better quality fruit next season.
Great. Looks good. All right, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay.
It's such a relief.
All right, well, let's get on that plum tree next. So we'll prune them back to, to get the height right and the density right, and then we'll prune out some of that new growth, but leave some of those new little spurs that are going to put out new growth and fruit for next year.
You know, what's really important if you want to have fun, really have fun and be successful at gardening, is to plant things that grow in your region. So it's real important that you know your zone, your planting zone, and that you then experiment, because we have really different microclimates, especially here in San Luis Obispo. Things like Santa Rosa plums grow really well here, apples grow really well here, lowish chill apples grow well here. The pluot's doing really well, the persimmon does well, the fig does well, because we don't get a ton of freeze. But I need to be able to get down into the 20s here. If plants that get too cold, they whine the whole time and don't do well.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is our finished plum tree. It's looking good. It's about 8 feet tall. So we headed it back pretty well, thinned it out, and plum trees produce fruit on old fruit spurs. Like we'll get fruit on these old spurs here, and then on 1-year-old growth. So not the New Year's growth. So that's what you're pruning for with plum trees. This is a Fuyu persimmon, and this one we tipped back, thinned it out, took out any dead wood, crossing branches. Persimmon trees produce fruit on 1-year-old growth and new growth, which is unique to a lot of fruit trees. So this guy will produce, this is 1-year-old growth here to this node from last year. So this will produce next year as well as whatever grows off of that branch. You can see this one here. These persimmons grew on a new shoot, and here's the node here. And so it could have produced on this as well, which would have been the 1-year-old growth. This is this year's growth. And so this one will produce again next year. So tipping them back like this and leaving those buds on is a good way to prune the persimmon trees. So we have another beautiful day here in San Luis Obispo. We're going to begin pruning this pluot. Plum trees produce fruit on 1-year-old growth and old fruit spurs. So we're going to cut back a lot of the new growth and tip it back so that next year that new growth produces fruit. So with a lot of these new shoots, the New Year's growth, I'm cutting them back by about 2/3. That way next year those will produce a lot of fruit. For example, this one is 1 year's growth all the way from here to here. So I'm going to cut it back all the way to here. That way it's reachable and also is producing fruit on this new growth. All right, this pluot is finished. So we brought it down about 5 feet, 6 feet, and gave it a nice flat top, opened up the middle so it gets lots of sunlight, and reduced those 1-year-old shoots back 2/3 so that they produce next year beautifully, and it's looking good. Okay, we've got this beautiful fig tree here. Look how nice this big guy is. He's a little bit wild and crazy and overgrown, but you can see it was loaded with figs on which year's growth? The new growth. This is New Year's growth from here, and you can see there's no fruit beyond that, but the fruit is out here on the tips of the branches, which means figs grow on the coming year's new growth. So cutting back a fig heavily is not a problem, which means the more you cut back a fig, the more new growth you're going to have and the more fruit you're going to get. So we're going to cut this pretty heavily. All right. I know you're probably thinking he should have 2 hands on that chainsaw. Sorry for that. It's true. You should always have 2 hands on your saw. I have 27 years experience using chainsaws or more. So it's easy for me to one-hand it and hold the branch. So the fig tree is finished, looking good. Brought the top way down, some chainsaw pruning. You can see a lot of big cuts were made, which is okay for a fig tree because they're going to crank out a lot of new growth that'll be 4, 5, 6 feet long next year and loaded with figs. So if this is a big mature fig, that's how to do it. So Linda, I just want to thank you so much. Thanks for being a great master gardener and all the advice you give to people and the videos you make, and it's a pleasure to make this one with you.
My pleasure. It's great to work with you again, and always wish you the best and look forward to working with you next year.
Thank you so much. San Luis Obispo. What a beautiful place.